A racist woman thought mocking Big Shaq's giant shoes was just a quick laugh for social media. But that snap wasn't just a photo, it was a spark. What she called a joke was actually a legacy. Shoes that had walked through struggle, lifted communities, and quietly changed lives. When a stranger stepped in to expose the truth behind the soles, the city remembered who really deserved respect. Because some shoes don't just carry a man, they carry a movement. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Savannah, Georgia, where the moss hangs like time itself, draped across old oak limbs, swaying gently under the sun's easy weight. It's a city that hums in the daylight, warm with stories, whispers, and the steady rhythm of feet that know where they're going. And right now those feet, size 22, custom-made, worn smooth at the heel, belong to the man the city has come to know, not just by name, but by presence.
Big Shaq.
He walks the same route every morning, not fast, not slow, just steady, like his soul's sinking with the earth beneath. There's no entourage, no music in his ears, just the sound of his own breath, the creak of old wood planks on the park bridge, and the occasional chirp of birds smart enough to sing while the day is still young. Shaq isn't trying to be seen, but he always is. A group of kids on a field trip spot him first. One of them, maybe 8 years old, points wide-eyed and whispers something that makes the others laugh. But it's not the laugh of mockery. It's joy. Awe. The kind that bubbles up in your chest when you realize you're seeing someone your uncle once told you stories about. Shaq catches the boy's eye and gives him a playful wink. The boy being a few paces ahead. An older couple sits on a bench beneath a rusted iron lamppost. The man, white beard down to his collarbone, waves like he's known Shaq for decades. Maybe he has. Shaq lifts his hand in return, then pauses long enough to ask about the man's knee. The woman smiles at him like he's a nephew she still prays for. This is who Shaq is here. Not the basketball legend, not the millionaire, not the celebrity with endorsements and sound bites and brand deals. Here, in this corner of the world wrapped in trees and memory, Shaq is something else, something quieter, a keeper of rhythm, a familiar soul in a changing world. Today he wears his gray sweats, a faded hoodie, and those unmistakable shoes, giants of leather and rubber. They squeak softly with each step, not because they're new, but because they're his, custom-built for size and strength, not style. They've walked through charity events, school gymnasiums, and back alleys alike, and today they're walking through light. But something's different. As he rounds the west curve of the park, near the old marble fountain that no longer spits water but still draws visitors with its carvings, Shaq senses it. A quiet tension, like the air isn't breathing right. He can't explain it, just a shift. A pause in the usual rhythm. He doesn't break stride. A woman stands near the fountain, not far from the mural of Savannah's heroes painted on the nearby red brick wall. She's dressed like the kind of person who expects to be looked at. Blonde bob, designer sunglasses, sharp white blazer over tight denim. Holding her phone vertically, she's angled just right to capture something or someone behind her. She grins. Subtle. Snake-like. Shaq doesn't notice her at first. Or rather, he notices, but doesn't register the intent. She lowers her glasses, glances over her shoulder, lifts the phone higher, and click, takes a selfie. He's in the background. Shoes and all. She types something fast, thumbs moving like they've done this before. A moment later, she laughs quietly to herself, then turns and walks the other way, tapping her screen like she's posting her masterpiece. Shaq sees her finally, eyes narrowing not in anger, but curiosity. He's used to phones, used to pictures, used to being a moment in someone else's highlight reel. But something about her walk, too satisfied, too rehearsed, sticks in his mind. He shakes it off. 2 teenagers approach him next. Boys, maybe high school age, both holding out sneakers for him to sign. One pair is battered and scuffed, the sole peeling slightly at the edge. The other is practically new. Shaq takes the worn ones first, running a finger along the tear. You still hoop in these? He asks, voice gravel deep. The boy nods. Yeah, only ones I got. Shaq signs them both, adding a small crown sketch next to his name, on the battered pair. Keep ballin', he says. They thank him and run off. It's a small thing, but it settles him, centers him again. He continues on. There's a vendor setting up a pretzel cart by the chess tables. Shaq stops and helps him lift a cooler that's too heavy for one back. They joke. They laugh. The vendor Deshaun tells Shaq his daughter got accepted into Spelman College. Shaq beams like it's his own win. No cameras. No audience. Just moments stacking like bricks. But even here, even now, a ripple moves through the day. Down the path, a woman checks her phone and frowns. She whispers something to her friend, who looks up, eyes trailing toward Shaq. Another tap, another scroll. The expressions shift: confusion, recognition, and then something else. Unease. Something spreading. Quiet, but swift. Shaq finishes his walk near the duck pond, where a little girl in pigtails tosses bread bits into the water. Her father sits on a nearby bench, watching carefully. The girl looks up at Shaq as he passes, then tugs on her dad's sleeve. "He's got the biggest shoes ever," she says. Shaq laughs, a warm chest-deep sound, and gives her a soft salute. But even as he smiles, something in his chest tightens. He doesn't know it yet, but Clarissa Dunn, the woman in white, just posted that selfie. The caption reads, "When clowns forget the circus closed years ago. Cops okay. Two. On whose man's is this? Savannah sightings." It's already been liked a few dozen times. Shared twice. Someone's laughing. Someone else is tagging friends. It's moving. But it hasn't exploded. Not yet. Jace Holloway, 31, leather jacket, sits by the fountain's edge, with a lukewarm coffee and a half-read book on city planning. He's watched the whole thing, saw the woman angle her camera, saw her smirk. He didn't react then, but now he checks his phone and sees the post, and what he reads punches something awake in him. He knows Shaq. Not personally, but through story. Through memory. Through a single afternoon, when he was 10, in a beat-up school gym, holding a basketball twice the size of his hand, and Shaq walked in with boxes of shoes and a laugh that filled the rafters. Jace doesn't remember the speech Shaq gave that day. Doesn't even remember if they made eye contact. But he remembers walking home with new shoes. He remembers feeling seen. He taps on Clarissa's profile, scrolls, finds more posts, sarcastic, superficial, a little venom in every caption. And then there it is. A post from last year, praising local legends like Shaq, who give back without needing attention. The contrast stings. Jace stares at her latest post again. The clown emoji. The tone. The mockery. His fingers hover above his screen. He doesn't know why yet. But he screenshots it. Not to cancel her. Not for clout. Just instinct. He saves it. Then opens a notes app. Types something raw. Unfiltered. "This man gave out more shoes than most folks ever owned. You mock the size because you don't know the weight they carry." He doesn't post it. Not yet. The sky overhead is still bright. The park still hums. But the breeze has shifted. The day has cracked. Just slightly. Something has begun. Something quiet. But it won't stay quiet for long. And Shaq, still walking, still waving, still carrying more than anyone can see. He didn't tag her. Didn't need to. The internet would do what it always does. Connect the dots. But Jace wasn't here to start a war. He just wanted to shift the narrative. Just enough to remind people who Shaq really was. As the tweets started picking up traction, retweets, likes, comments piling up, Jace walked away from the park. The sun hadn't moved much, but the tone of the day had behind him. Clarissa checked her phone again, and frowned. A new notification. A familiar picture. But this one wasn't hers. Farther down the path, Shaq stood up, pocketed his notepad, and stretched gently. Something was in the air. He could feel it, like a drumbeat beneath the ground. He didn't know yet that a storm had begun to stir. Not one of weather, but of truth. A selfie had been taken, but it was what came after that would echo loudest. And that echo had just begun. Within 2 hours, the post had amassed nearly 900 likes and over 200 comments. A meme page, one known more for its cruelty than comedy, had reposted it, circling Shaq's shoes in red and adding a caption that read, "Size 22s, but can't step into fashion." The responses were immediate. Laughing emojis, gifs, mockery stacked on mockery. And in the middle of it all, Clarissa, liking each mention, reposting subtle replies, smiling behind her screen like the internet had just handed her another viral moment, blind to what she'd truly ignited. Shaq, meanwhile, was across town visiting a local rec center. It wasn't a scheduled event. He dropped by after a call from a youth director, who said the kids could use some encouragement after a funding cut, gutted their after-school programs. Shaq brought pizza, signed basketball, told stories that made the room echo with laughter. He gave out 3 new pairs of shoes, quietly, without ceremony, and when the kids weren't looking, he slipped a check into the director's hands, folded sealed with a nod that said not to make a thing of it. He didn't check his phone that day. He never did when he was with kids. He kept his attention full, focused, present. That's what made him who he was. Not just big in body, but big in being. While the internet swirled with the smoke of a fire it didn't yet understand, Shaq remained the same man who once gave his coat to a homeless man in a snowstorm. The same man who used his silence not as a defense but as a statement. But someone else was watching closely. Jace Holloway sat in his 1-bedroom apartment, the window cracked open just enough to let in the smell of the evening rain. He had no TV on, no music playing, just the flickering blue light of his screen. As he scrolled through the wildfire Clarissa had unknowingly lit, he recognized the patterns instantly. The echo chambers that fed off of cruelty, each sarcastic comment another log on the fire. But more than that, he saw how fast it had spread, and something in him tightened. He remembered the shoes, the ones Shaq had handed out all those years ago. They were too big. Sure, but when Jace slipped them on, he felt like someone important had seen him. Not just acknowledged but included. That kind of impact didn't fade. It stayed etched into the corners of your character. So seeing it mocked like this by someone who wouldn't last 5 minutes in those shoes, figuratively or literally, was more than offensive. It was personal. He didn't hesitate this time. He pulled up Clarissa's original post and opened a design app. On one side he placed the now viral selfie, her smirking, Shaq's back turned, those massive sneakers front and center. On the other he inserted a photo from an old news article, Shaq kneeling beside a child, smiling as he laced up a pair of those same shoes on feet half the size. The image wasn't perfect quality, but the emotion in it cut like glass. Jace added one simple caption beneath the side-by-side, mocking a man for wearing shoes he once gave away to kids who couldn't afford them. He hit post. It didn't go nuclear right away. First, it simmered. A few retweets, a handful of bookmarks. But within 20 minutes, the comment section began to shift. People who had mindlessly laughed at Clarissa's post earlier started quoting Jace's version. And they weren't laughing anymore. They were thinking. One user wrote, "Wait, this the same Shaq who paid off random folks' layaways at Christmas." Another added, "Imagine being so small you gotta tear down someone who's done more good by 9 a.m. than you will in a year." The narrative was changing, not in a wave, but in a pivot. The crowd that once laughed began to reflect. The crowd that stayed silent began to speak. And the fire Clarissa lit was suddenly roaring in another direction. Jace didn't follow the numbers. He wasn't chasing views. But he noticed the shift in tone. The story had evolved beyond a selfie. It had become a mirror. Clarissa, lounging in her tastefully decorated condo with a glass of white wine and a face mask, was oblivious to the turn. She'd muted notifications after the first couple hundred likes, assuming the wave would ride itself. When she finally opened her phone to check the post's performance, she noticed a few angry comments trickling in. Then more. And then she saw Jace's post, shared under a hashtag that hadn't existed that morning. Walk in his shoes. There was no mention of her name, but the comparison was clear. The image had already been picked up by several influencer accounts, with huge followings. Activists, athletes and even a few verified celebs had reposted it. Some added their own memories of Shaq's kindness. Others just let the image speak. Clarissa tried to control it. She deleted the original post, locked her comments. But it was too late. Screenshots were everywhere. She wasn't just being corrected, she was being unmasked, not just for the selfie, but for what it represented, the ease with which people of power and privilege mock what they don't understand. Back in the heart of the city, Shaq finally opened his phone after the rec center visit. Dozens of unread messages, mentions, a gentle text from his mother. "You might want to see what's going around." He sat in his car, engine off, and scrolled. Slowly, carefully. At first it confused him. The original post had already been removed, but the commentary around it remained. Then he saw Jace's side by side. He stared at it for a long time. Not angry, not even sad, just still, like someone reading a letter they didn't know was written to them. He didn't save it, didn't respond, just closed the app, put the phone down and exhaled. That exhale said everything. He knew what it was like to be mocked. It wasn't new, but to be defended, not by PR teams or corporations, or even close friends, but by a stranger, that was different. That meant something. The fire continued through the night. Not the kind that destroys, but the kind that cleanses. The narrative moved away from memes and toward memory. People shared stories, personal ones. A mother who recalled Shaq paying for her family's dinner when her card was declined. A janitor who said Shaq helped him fix a flat tire in the rain without introducing himself. A single father whose daughter got a scholarship after Shaq noticed her basketball skills at a high school game. The internet had turned. Clarissa hadn't just misjudged a man. She'd misjudged a culture, a generation raised on Shaq's charisma, his generosity, his humanity. He wasn't just a celebrity to them. He was a cornerstone. A proof that big could mean gentle, that famous could still be human. Jace's post passed 500,000 shares by morning. Not because it was shocking, not because it was viral, but because it resonated. It struck a truth too often lost in curated lives and filtered cruelty. It reminded people what it means to walk in someone else's shoes. And those shoes? They'd walked a long, long way. Shaquille O'Neal had learned long ago that not every battle needed a roar. Sometimes, stillness was the strongest stance. So when his name trended for all the wrong reasons, when a stranger's mocking selfie lit up feeds and hashtags twisted around his shoes, Shaq didn't respond. He never did. Not to ignorance, not to cheap shots, and definitely not to ego. That morning, as the internet began to catch fire, Shaq sat alone in his home gym, palms resting on his knees, sweat trickling down his temples after a quiet workout. The air was thick with warmth and peace. His phone buzzed on the bench next to him, screen lighting up with mentions, text from colleagues, and links sent by people who cared enough to worry. But he didn't reach for it. Not yet. He knew how fast the digital tide could rise, and how fast it could retreat. He also knew who he was, and that meant more than any meme or trending tweet. But outside his silence, the internet didn't sleep. Jace Holloway's post was now a river feeding into larger currents. Conversations shifted from the shoes themselves to the story behind them. The caption had struck a nerve, mocking a man for wearing shoes he once gave away to kids who couldn't afford them. It was simple, powerful, honest, and it triggered something raw in the collective memory of a generation raised not just on Shaq's games, but on his character. People started talking, not in headlines but in threads. One tweet shared a video from 2003, where Shaq had surprised a classroom of third graders with new backpacks and sneakers before the school year. Another surfaced an old clip of him paying for a stranger's engagement ring in a jewelry store. But what hit hardest wasn't the grand gestures. It was the quiet ones, the personal ones. Stories buried deep in comment sections began rising like air bubbles. A woman named Marlene shared a grainy photo of a battered gym locker with the caption, "This was my brother's. He met Shaq at a shelter when he was 12. Got a pair of shoes signed. Still hasn't worn them. Says he'll give them to his son one day." Another story from a nurse in New Jersey read, "When my mom was sick and we couldn't afford the medicine, Shaq called in a favor and had it delivered. No camera, no post, just kindness." The volume grew, and as it did, the scrutiny turned toward Clarissa Dunn. She had kept quiet after deleting the post, assuming the social media cycle would do what it always did, burn fast and forget faster. But this wasn't a regular viral scandal. This was a values-based storm. It wasn't about canceling. It was about calling out. And the internet had questions. Who was Clarissa Dunn? It didn't take much for users to start digging. She wasn't just a socialite or a casual Instagram user. She was a local news anchor in Savannah, with a polished image built on buzzwords: community, grace, tradition, civility. Her channel's morning show ran segments like Kindness, In the South, and Rising with Gratitude. She had branded herself as a purveyor of goodwill, a voice of reason in divided times. But now, people were unearthing her old tweets. Comments laced with sarcasm about unhoused people, jokes made in poor taste about airport security checks, passive-aggressive posts that suddenly read with a different tone. A screen-recorded video surfaced from a charity gala 3 years ago, where Clarissa had introduced Shaq to the stage with glowing praise. "A man of presence, purpose, and generosity," she had said, smiling into the mic. And now? She had reduced him to a punchline. The contradiction was too loud to ignore. Hashtags evolved. Walk in his shoes was now trending alongside clown in disguise. aimed squarely at Clarissa's hypocrisy. People didn't just want an apology, they wanted accountability. Not just for one post, but for the gap between who she pretended to be and who she truly revealed herself as. Through it all, Shaq said nothing. Not on social media, not to reporters, not even in casual conversation. But his silence wasn't emptiness. It was weight. It meant something. It left a void that others tried to fill, and no voice filled it louder or more powerfully than Jace Holloway. Jace wasn't chasing fame. He hadn't planned to become a digital spokesperson. But the more traction his post gained, the more messages he received. DMs from strangers, comments asking for interviews, requests for quotes. Most of them he ignored. But some he read carefully. And when one local journalist asked why he'd posted what he did, his response became the next viral moment. He wrote, "Because those shoes walked into a gym in my neighborhood when the lights were flickering, and the heat barely worked. And in that moment, someone important made a bunch of kids feel like they mattered. That's not just a story, that's a foundation. You don't mock that. You honor it." That quote alone was shared by national figures, sports icons, activists, celebrities who had known Shaq both publicly and privately. And it turned the conversation again, from scandal to reflection. People began asking themselves, what kind of world allowed someone like Clarissa to mock someone like Shaq and feel emboldened enough to post it? What did it say about how we perceive kindness, about how society rewards arrogance disguised as confidence and punishes humility mistaken for weakness? Clarissa tried to respond. Late that evening, she uploaded a video, clearly scripted, makeup pristine, tone composed. She didn't cry, she didn't admit much. She called it a lapse in judgment, and said she never meant harm. The comments turned feral almost instantly. Users flooded the replies. You meant it when you typed it. Apology not accepted. Funny how your judgment only lapses in public. She deleted the video within hours. Meanwhile, Shaq showed up to a small basketball tournament at a middle school just outside the city. He wasn't scheduled to be there. He didn't give a speech. He simply walked in, nodded at the kids, and sat on the bench beside the coach. He cheered like any parent, signed a few jerseys, ate from the concession stand, smiled. But every phone in the gym was up. Every eye was on him. And when the kids won the game, and one little boy came running toward him, yelling, "Shaq, we did it," that moment hit the internet too. And it crushed the narrative Clarissa had tried to spin. Because this was the truth. This man, the one in the size 22s, the one who didn't clap back or posture or perform, was out there, showing up, being present, giving without recording it, walking the walk, even when others tried to tear him down. Jace watched all this unfold from a distance. He still hadn't met Shaq, still hadn't sent a message, but he felt the ripple of his post in every new story that surfaced, every message he got from someone who remembered how one act of kindness from someone they admired had changed them forever. He wasn't a hero. He was just someone who refused to stay quiet. And Shaq? He didn't need to say a word. Because when you've lived a life that echoes louder than the noise, silence becomes your symphony. And while the world kept buzzing, reposting, unpacking, and debating, he just kept walking. Same shoes, same rhythm, same purpose. Only now the world was listening. The neighborhood was the kind of place that forgot to dream. Most mornings began with sirens echoing down alleys, their wail cutting across rusted window units that hummed weakly against the swell of southern humidity. And in the middle of it all, there was a boy 10 years old, skinny, silent, and mostly invisible. His name was Jace. He wasn't the loudest in his class. Never tried to be. He kept to the edges, the kind of kid who didn't speak unless asked twice. His jeans were hand-me-downs from someone older, rougher. His shirts were always one size off. He had one good hoodie that he wore too often, and sneakers that talked back with every step, the soles flapping loose at the toe, like mouths begging to be replaced. Kids noticed. Kids always noticed. He never said it out loud, but he hated those shoes. Hated the way they squeaked on polished floors. Hated how they curled at the edge when he sat cross-legged during reading hour. Hated that they were too tight at the arch and too loose in the heel. But more than anything, he hated the way they made him feel, like he was trying to hold together something that had already fallen apart. His mother, Darlene, worked double shifts at the diner across town and still came home smelling like burnt bacon and dish soap. She smiled with tired eyes and lied gently, like all good mothers do. "Next month, baby. Next month we'll get you new ones. But Jace knew better. The food stamps were already stretched thin, rent was late, and the electric bill came with bright red letters now. New shoes weren't just a luxury, they were fiction. Then one Friday afternoon, the school gym filled with noise. The teacher said there was going to be an assembly. Kids groaned. They always did. But something in the air shifted when the principal came over the intercom and said the name, Shaquille O'Neal. There were whispers. Jaws dropped. Someone asked if it was the real Shaq, the actual Shaq. Nobody believed it, until the side doors opened, and there he was, ducking under the archway, smiling like the room was his living room. The gym exploded. Kids screamed. Teachers clapped, and Jace just sat there stunned. Not because a celebrity walked in, but because someone like that had walked into a place like this. Shaq wasn't there to talk about fame. He didn't give a lecture about staying in school, or avoiding drugs, at least not in the way everyone expected. He joked. He made faces. He told stories about his childhood, about growing up in a small apartment, about how his mother made him read books before he was allowed to play ball. And then he pointed at the stack of boxes behind him. Shoes. 100 pairs. All sizes. All branded with his name, and not one kid in that gym left empty-handed. When Jace's name was called, he didn't want to walk up, not because he wasn't excited, but because he wasn't used to being noticed. His legs felt heavy, his hands were shaking. When he got to the front, he didn't say a word. He just looked at Shaq, who bent down slightly, looked him right in the eye and grinned. "You ball, little man?" Shaq asked. Jace shook his head. Shaq laughed. "You will now." Then he handed him the box. They were size 11s, way too big for a 10-year-old with narrow feet. But they were his. Brand new. Laced with bold black lines, and the silver Shaq silhouette on the side. The box smelled like rubber and promise. Jace didn't even wait to get home. He sat on the gym floor, ripped the tape, and put them on right there. They didn't fit, not really. But he didn't care. Because for the first time in his life, he belonged to something bigger. That night, he didn't put them in the closet. He didn't leave them by the door. He placed them beside his bed facing out. Like guardians. He stared at them until he fell asleep. And in his dreams, he wasn't Jace from Building 4A. He was someone who mattered. The weeks that followed were different. He still got teased a little jealous. Kids pointed out how oversized the sneakers were. Said he looked like he was wearing boats. But the tone had changed. There was respect behind the jabs. Curiosity. Even envy. Jace started walking taller. He raised his hand more in class. He stopped flinching when teachers called on him. Something about those shoes had rewired his posture, and not just the physical kind. His mom noticed it too. "You're different," she said one evening, as they sat on the stoop, her apron still dusted with flour. "You're standing up straighter." He smiled. "I'm just getting taller." She ruffled his hair. "Maybe, or maybe you finally believe you're allowed to be seen." That line stuck with him. Through middle school, high school, and every rough patch that followed, he held on to those shoes. Even when he outgrew them, even when the logo faded, and the soles stiffened, he never threw them out. He kept them in a box, wrapped in old newspaper, tucked in the back of his closet like an artifact, not because they were valuable, but because they were to him. And now, 2 decades later, that same boy, now a man, watched as a stranger, tried to turn those shoes into a punchline. Jace had felt it deep in his gut, that old ache of being small, of being someone's joke instead of someone's story. But this time he had a voice, and more importantly, he had memory. He hadn't told anyone, not even in the tweet that had gone viral. But those shoes in that mocking selfie weren't just sneakers to him. They were a turning point, a chapter, a silent vow that he would never become the kind of person who laughed at someone for showing up. Because that's what those shoes represented. Someone showing up when they didn't have to. Jace didn't care about going viral. He didn't want credit, but the more people responded to his post, the more he realized how many others had stories like his. Shoes given. Smiles shared. Lives quietly changed. All because one man had refused to keep his success to himself. He opened his closet that evening, reached for the box, and lifted the lid. The shoes were still there. Faded, but intact. He ran a hand along the toe, remembering how big they once felt. How safe. He thought about the kids today. Those who'd seen the post, read the comments, and maybe questioned their own worth. He knew what that doubt felt like, and he wouldn't let it go unanswered. That night he wrote a longer post. No hashtags. No outrage. Just story. He told the world about the gym, the box, the smell of new rubber, about the kid who felt seen, about the silence that turned into confidence, about a pair of size 11s that never quite fit but changed everything anyway. And at the end he wrote, "These shoes didn't just walk me through a rough neighborhood, they walked me into the man I became. I'll never mock that. I'll never forget it." He didn't tag Shaq, didn't need to. Because deep down, Jace knew, when something truly matters, it doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs to be worn. Clarissa Dunn sat on the edge of her velvet sofa, ring light glowing just off camera, every inch of her apartment staged like the cover of a lifestyle magazine. Her laptop was open, a script sitting just off screen. The cursor blinked beside her bullet points. She inhaled deeply, tilted her chin the way she had 100 times before going on air, and pressed record. Her apology lasted 2 minutes and 43 seconds. It began with a soft smile, measured, precise. "Hi everyone. I want to speak from the heart today," she began, voice dipped in false vulnerability. She talked about the unintended consequences of her actions. Said she never meant to hurt anyone. Claimed the photo was taken without context, and that her words were misunderstood. She invoked her years in media, her history of supporting community causes, and ended with, "I'm learning. I'm growing, and I hope you'll give me that grace." Then she clicked upload. At first, silence. A few loyal followers commented with heart emojis, and the predictable, "We all make mistakes." But within minutes, the tide rolled in. Cold, fast, and merciless. No one was buying it. The top comment read, "You're not sorry you posted it. You're sorry you got caught." Another, "What context makes mocking someone's shoes okay? We'll wait." A popular podcast host stitched her video, saying, "Imagine mocking a legend and thinking an apology in highlighter and contour fixes it." By the end of the hour, the dislikes outnumbered the likes by thousands. And the backlash wasn't just online anymore. One of her sponsors, an organic skincare brand, posted a quiet but clear statement: "We do not condone public shaming or racism in any form." Effective immediately, we've ended our partnership with Clarissa Dunn. The next to follow was a boutique clothing label. Then her book deal, which had only just been announced a month prior, quietly disappeared from the publisher's website. No press release, just a vanishing act. At the studio, things were worse. Her co-anchor, Trevor Lane, who had sat beside her every weekday for 3 years, didn't say good morning in the makeup chair. During the live broadcast, when Clarissa tried to smile between segments, Trevor didn't return it. He kept his eyes on the teleprompter, his voice flat, not unprofessional but cold. And during a segment about local heroes, when Shaq's name was mentioned as someone who had just made a large donation to the children's hospital, Trevor didn't even look at her. The silence said enough. Clarissa tried to push through the day. She clung to the script, her professionalism, like armor. But something about the stillness around her unsettled her more than the loud backlash. No one in the office looked her in the eye. No one defended her. And worse, no one forgot. Meanwhile, Shaq's day looked nothing like hers. He walked the bright halls of the St. James Children's Hospital, his head ducked beneath paper streamers made by the kids. Nurses lit up when he entered. Children giggled and shouted his name like he was part superhero, part uncle. He moved slowly, bending his long frame to meet eye level with every child he visited. He handed out teddy bears, sat at a 6-year-old girl recovering from her 3rd surgery. He let her hold his finger like a promise while her mother watched, tears barely contained. He didn't bring cameras. Never did. It wasn't for likes or headlines. It was because they mattered. These kids, these families, the ones the world so often forgot. He stayed longer than planned, even when the staff told him he could go. He wasn't smiling for show, but he was smiling, because when he was there, nothing else mattered. Not the noise. Not the trending hashtags. Not the woman who'd reduced him to a caption. But later, after the hospital, the weight began to settle. He returned home just after dusk. The house was quiet. No team, no staff, just a man tired in a way that had nothing to do with his size. He peeled off his hoodie, poured himself a glass of water, and sat on the edge of his couch. His phone sat face down on the kitchen counter. For a moment, he stared at it. Then he picked it up. The notification bubble was overwhelming. Messages, tags, emails, missed calls. He opened Instagram. The image hit him immediately. Clarissa's selfie, still circulating in reposts, and stitched reactions, meme versions layered with mock quotes and clown horns. One version even placed a red nose and wig on her. He swiped slowly, methodically. He saw her video, paused halfway through, face frozen in that soft begging expression. He didn't click play. Then he saw the memes about him. Some harmless, others sharper. One had a split image. On one side, Shaq giving shoes to a child. On the other, the clown emoji next to Clarissa's face. He wasn't angry, not even sad, just tired. But then came Jace's post. The side-by-side with the caption that had started everything. The gym photo. The memory captured in a child's awed eyes. And finally, the long post Jace had written the night before. About the boy who'd kept those shoes by his bed. About the shoes that didn't fit his feet but fixed something deeper. Shaq stared at the screen. Not blinking. Not moving. Because it meant something. All this time he'd been giving because it was right. Not because it would ripple. Not because someone would write about it years later. But here it was. Echoing back at him through a man's story. Years after a handshake in a broken gym. He placed the phone down, rubbed his hands over his face. Then he leaned back, the couch creaking under his weight, and exhaled, a long, deep breath that came from somewhere beyond his chest. A place tired of being misjudged, mocked, misunderstood. He didn't cry, but the stillness that followed was heavier than any tear. This wasn't the first time he'd been caricatured. It wouldn't be the last. But this time, it got to him. Because it wasn't just about shoes. It was about erasure. About how quickly the world forgets goodness and replaces it with noise. How quickly a reputation built on kindness can be swept aside by one person's carelessness. Clarissa's apology hadn't mattered. Not to him. Not to anyone who understood what those shoes represented. The truth couldn't be wrapped in concealer and delivered with a press-ready smile. It lived in lived moments. In kids who grew up into men like Jace. In hospital rooms and school gyms. In silence. In presence. Shaq leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He didn't want revenge. He didn't want attention. But for the first time in a long while, he felt something stir. Not anger, but reflection. A need to remind the world why he walked the way he did. Why he never stopped giving. Why he never lashed back. Because some stories aren't told for sympathy. They're told so people remember. And tonight, alone in his home with the city spinning around his name, Shaq finally let himself feel it. Not for the internet. Not for a headline. Just for himself. The noise could wait. The morning came soft and slow. Fog resting like a blanket across the Savannah roads, as if even the sky didn't want to rush. On the edge of the city, just off a bend where the oaks thinned out, and the radio towers blinked red against the pale sky, sat a roadside diner with a flickering neon sign that read Mabel's Kitchen, the kind of place where no one asked questions, and the pancakes came out in stacks that dared you to finish them. Shaq liked it here. No cameras, no commotion, just the smell of bacon grease, and syrup, and a waitress named Louise, who'd long stopped pretending he was a celebrity. She greeted him like she always did, "Mornin' sugar," and set down his coffee before he even had to ask. He slid into his usual booth, the one near the window that gave a good view of the gravel lot, wide enough for him to stretch his legs. He wore a gray hoodie, low cap and his infamous size 22 sneakers, laces frayed just enough to show wear, but not neglect. He always kept things simple here. Scrambled eggs, turkey sausage, toast. No frills, no flash. The diner was mostly empty. A trucker at the far end, mumbling into his headset. A mother wrangling two toddlers with crayons. And bribery. Then the bell above the door jingled, cutting gently through the clink of forks and the low hum of a classic soul playlist. Jace Holloway stepped inside. He hadn't meant to come.
Not really.
He'd driven past the diner twice before he finally pulled into the lot, heart hammering in his chest like it had back when he stood outside that gym 20 years ago. He carried a small, weather-worn scrapbook tucked under one arm. It was square, with a faded blue cover, and corners that curled like paper leaves. His hands were sweating. His palms, shaky. He didn't expect Shaq to recognize him. Why would he? He was just a kid in a line once. A memory Shaq probably never stored. But Jace had carried that day like a quiet anthem ever since. And after all the noise of the past few days, the post, the apology, the silence, something in him said go.
He didn't want to go viral again.
Didn't want another thread. Another headline. He wanted this. To sit across from the man whose kindness helped rewrite the way he saw the world. Shaq noticed him the moment he walked in. Tall, lean, dressed in denim, and a leather jacket that had seen a few stories. Their eyes met briefly, and Shaq gave a polite nod, assuming he was just another passerby. But then Jace didn't walk past. He stopped at the edge of the booth, hesitating just long enough for Shaq to lower his coffee. "Mind if I sit?" Jace asked, voice steady but unsure. Shaq looked at the scrapbook, then at the man. He gestured to the seat across from him. "Go ahead." Jace sat. He didn't touch the menu, didn't look around. He placed the scrapbook on the table like something sacred. "I know you don't know me," he started. "And I'm not here for a selfie or a quote or anything like that. I needed to give this to you." Shaq leaned back slightly, watching. Jace opened the scrapbook. The first page held a photograph, aged, slightly discolored, but clear enough to show a boy, maybe 10 years old, in an oversized hoodie and a grin too wide for his face. On his feet were Shaq brand sneakers, clearly several sizes too large. His arms were thrown up like he'd just hit a game-winning shot, even though the backdrop was just a worn-out basketball court with crooked rims. Shaq stared at the photo, then at Jace. "I was that kid," Jace said quietly. "Back when you came to Madison Elementary, you brought shoes. I didn't think I mattered until you handed me that box." Shaq's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. His hands folded on the table. His eyes, steady but softer now, stayed locked on Jace. Jace turned the page. There were more photos, school awards, drawings, scrawled letters from a child's hand, thanking Mr. O'Neill for cool shoes, and good hugs. One page had a crumpled flyer from the day Shaq visited the school. At the bottom, scribbled in pen, were the words, "One day, I'll be someone too." "I kept these," Jace said. "All this time, through moves, through things I don't even talk about. Because those shoes weren't just sneakers to me. They were proof that I wasn't invisible." Shaq's jaw worked, ever so slightly. He said nothing, but his gaze never left the pages. "I've been thinking about what's been going on lately," Jace continued. "All this noise, all these people trying to turn you into a headline either to tear down or defend. And I realized something." He slid the scrapbook across the table until it was in front of Shaq. "You never asked for that. You've been showing up for years. Quiet, steady, and somehow people still try to define you in 2 seconds with a caption." Shaq's fingers hovered over the scrapbook, but he didn't open it. He just looked at it like it held weight. Like memory pressed between paper and glue had become something real again. Jace leaned back. "I know you're not going to post some angry rant. That's not who you are. But don't let her steal this moment. The one you built. You walked through this world giving when no one asked you to. And I think people are finally remembering that." Shaq looked up slowly. Their eyes met, and in that quiet moment, something passed between them. Not words, not fame, not even gratitude, just understanding. Shaq finally spoke. "What's your name?" "Jace. Jace Holloway." Shaq nodded. "I remember that school." Jace's eyebrows lifted. Stunned. "You do?" Shaq smiled faintly. "Y'all had that busted scoreboard with only half the bulbs working. I hit the horn by accident during my speech." Jace let out a short laugh, caught off guard, unsure if he was about to cry or chuckle. "Yeah, that was us." Shaq looked down at the scrapbook again, ran his hand over the cover. "You didn't have to bring this," he said. "I did," Jace replied. "Because it wasn't about you remembering me. It was about me reminding you that you mattered before anyone questioned it." Shaq didn't speak for a long time. He sat with the weight of those words, the memory of gym lights and children's laughter echoing in his ears. Finally, he said, "You know, folks always ask me what the biggest thing I've ever done is. They expect me to say some championship, some record. But it's this. It's that a kid can grow up and say he felt seen. That's everything." Jace nodded. "I just wanted you to know," he said, standing up slowly. "You were never just background noise. Not to us." He turned to leave. But before he reached the door, Shaq called out, "Hey, Jace." He turned. Shaq tapped the scrapbook. "You sure you don't want this back?" Jace smiled, a little sad, a little proud. "I already lived it. Now it's yours." Then he walked out into the morning, the fog beginning to lift, the day not yet loud. Shaq sat there for a while longer, untouched coffee going cold, his hand resting gently on the cover of the scrapbook. The noise of the world buzzed on outside, But in that booth just for now there was nothing but peace. And in that silence he remembered exactly why he walked. Savannah had secrets, but not the kind that whispered through alleys or hid in shadows. Its secrets lived in plain view, folded into the Spanish moss, tucked beneath cobblestone paths, and sometimes mounted quietly above old iron lampposts. The city had, in recent years, installed a small network of high-definition surveillance cameras as part of a beautification and safety initiative. Nothing invasive, nothing widely publicized, just a few public service cameras scattered around the more heavily trafficked areas, downtown intersections, historical squares, and a particular park where Shaquille O'Neal had walked the same morning. Clarissa Dunn took a photo that would ignite a firestorm. Jace Holloway discovered the existence of those cameras, not through curiosity, but coincidence. He was digging, not in malice but in purpose. The scrapbook he'd left with Shaq was a moment, a truth passed hand to hand, but something inside Jace still burned. Not with anger, but with insistence. The internet was full of reaction, noise, counter-noise. But the truth, the real truth of what happened that day in the park, of who Shaq had been before that lens snapped, was buried beneath assumption and spin. So he filed a request. It was a long shot. Freedom of Information Act filings didn't move fast, especially when filed by civilians. But Savannah's public access portal had a digital submission form, and Jace was patient. He noted the time, the location, the specific angle from where Clarissa had taken the selfie. He described the moment, gave context, and asked if the footage from that morning between 10:15 and 11 a.m. could be reviewed and released. He didn't expect a response. Not quickly anyway. But 3 days later an email arrived. The city clerk's office had approved the request. There was no audio, but the video file was attached. Clean. 4K resolution. 17 minutes of uninterrupted footage from a mounted pole cam, capturing the southeast quadrant of the park, including the marble fountain, the mural wall, and the meandering trail where Shaq had taken his now infamous stroll. Jace watched it alone at first. He muted his phone, dimmed the lights, pressed play. The footage opened with Shaq entering from the far left corner of the frame. Hoodie on, shoes unmistakable. The morning was bright. People scattered like paint drops across the frame. At first, nothing remarkable happened. Then came the details. Shaq stopped to help an elderly man who'd dropped his cane. The man struggled to bend, and Shaq, with no hesitation, stepped in, lifted the cane, and gently placed a hand on the man's back as he steadied him. No cameras, no performance, just instinct. A few seconds later, a small child, maybe 5 years old, tripped near the walkway, her shoelace dragging behind her like a ribbon. Her mother was distracted with a baby stroller. Shaq crouched, tied the girl's sneaker with a practiced motion, and patted her shoulder. She smiled. He walked on. Then he passed a trash can with a soda can lying beside it. He stopped, bent despite his massive frame, and tossed it in. Clean. Quick. No fanfare. Just dignity. And then came her. Clarissa Dunn. She entered the frame from the opposite side, walking briskly, phone already in hand. She slowed as she approached Shaq, her eyes scanning, her stance shifting subtly, as she prepared for the moment. Then came the selfie, the smirk, the angle, her body twisted, phone lifted just enough to catch him from behind. The video didn't lie. It caught the exact second her lips curled into that half smile. It caught the way she quickly reviewed the photo, her finger hovering before tapping post. It caught the moment she walked away, face lit with satisfaction, utterly unaware that the truth had been captured from 30 feet above her head. Jace didn't rush to post it. He watched it 3 times, then a 4th. Because something in the footage tugged at him. Not just the sequence, not just the vindication, but a moment he almost missed. A detail. At 10:46:17, Clarissa stood near the fountain. Directly behind her, just barely in frame, was the mural wall. And on that wall, painted in warm earth tones, was a portrait of Savannah's community leaders, artists, educators, civil servants. And right there, just over her left shoulder, clear as daylight, was a young version of Shaq, smiling, holding a child on his shoulders. The mural had been painted 2 years earlier, and Jace remembered it clearly now. Clarissa had been on the city's Culture and Beautification Committee. She had approved that mural. In fact, she'd posted about it proudly during the unveiling. So honored to support the arts and lift up our local heroes. Savannah pride, community first. The irony was surgical. Here she was, mocking the man she once celebrated. In the shadow of a mural she helped approve, one she now stood in front of while taking a photo to humiliate him. It was almost poetic, and now Jace had the footage to prove it. He edited the clip carefully. No filters, no added music, just a title card. Watch for yourself. Unedited. This is what really happened. He uploaded the file to a neutral platform, no branding, no monetization, and tweeted the link with one line. Sometimes the camera sees more than the person holding it. It exploded, not just because of the content, but because of the contrast. The footage wasn't flashy. It wasn't emotional or loud. It was truth. Clear, objective, irrefutable. Commentators praised the restraint. Analysts dissected the symbolism. Former athletes posted it with captions like, "That's who he is. Always has been." Activists reposted it alongside Clarissa's old tweets, drawing out the hypocrisy in sharp detail. And then came the news outlets. Within hours, major networks picked it up. Surveillance footage contradicts viral post. Community rallies behind Shaq. Done in hot water after mural detail sparks further backlash. Man who sparked viral movement releases unedited truth. Jace's inbox flooded again. This time with media requests, invitations to speak, brand offers. He declined all of them. He hadn't done this to become a voice. He'd done it because the voice that mattered had chosen silence, and silence deserved defense too. Meanwhile, Clarissa tried to go into damage control again. She posted a follow-up apology. This one shot on a phone, no makeup, messy bun, couch behind her. "I'm not perfect," she said. "I'm human. I made a mistake. I'm learning every day." But by now, no one was listening. Because the footage had spoken louder than she ever could. And it hadn't yelled. It had simply shown. Shaq saw the video that night. He was in his home office, alone, when someone texted him the link. At first, he hesitated to click, but when he did, he watched in stillness. The small moments, the things he did without thinking. Seeing himself from the outside wasn't new, but this was different. This was proof. Not of his goodness, but of intention. Of the way he'd always moved through the world. When the clip ended, he saw the comments. Thousands of people. Sharing stories. Not just about him, but about their own lives. About kindness. About feeling seen. About being small in a loud world. And remembering the moments when someone chose to be gentle anyway. He closed his laptop slowly. Sat in the dark. And for the first time since the firestorm began, he let himself feel something other than weariness. He felt heard. No press conference. No interview. Just truth. Captured in a frame he didn't know existed. The camera had been hidden, but the clarity it delivered was anything but. And in the days that followed, Savannah changed, not because of outrage, but because of recognition. The mural was visited more. Kids pointed at the painted shack. Teachers brought students there to talk about empathy. And Clarissa? She disappeared quietly. But the truth, it stayed right there, playing on a loop in 1,000 browsers. Sometimes, justice doesn't shout. It just rolls the tape. It had been there the whole time. The mural, painted in warm tones and brushstrokes thick with memory, stretched across the red brick wall just behind the marble fountain in Savannah's historic quarter. At a quick glance, it was easy to miss. Just another city-funded artwork nestled among benches and iron lamp posts. But if you stopped long enough, really looked, the story unfolded across the wall in layered detail. A young girl holding a basketball with her chin up high, a high school coach with a whistle around his neck, a nurse clasping hands with a child, and in the center of it all, towering, smiling, unmistakable, Shaquille O'Neal. He stood painted mid-stride, one hand gently resting on the head of a little boy who gazed up at him with admiration. Shaq's other hand extended, not for a handshake, but open, like an offering. The symbolism was intentional. It represented giving without asking, showing up without needing praise. The mural had been commissioned 2 years earlier, as part of Savannah's Honor the City initiative, an effort to immortalize real-life figures who had made generational impacts. It had been a quiet project, led by local artists and a city culture committee. It didn't make national headlines, didn't trend, but within Savannah it had meant something. The unveiling had been covered on the morning news by none other than Clarissa Dunn. She'd stood in front of that mural in a sky blue dress, microphone in hand, voice soft with practiced warmth. This morning, she'd said into the camera, "We celebrate not just art, But character. Few figures have done more quietly for this community than Shaquille O'Neal. His generosity speaks louder than his stats. His presence is a reminder that true greatness often walks humbly among us. The footage still existed, archived in the station's feed, buried under months of other morning segments. It was almost forgotten, until someone remembered. It wasn't Jace this time. It was a local high school student named Tory, 17 years old, with an eye for details and a bone-deep sense of justice. She had been following the viral saga like everyone else, seen the memes, read the backlash, watched the surveillance footage that vindicated Shaq. But it was the mural that stuck with her. Something about the framing, the angle. She remembered watching the original unveiling on TV, with her grandmother. She remembered Clarissa Dunn saying those words. So Tory dug. She found the archived clip on the station's YouTube channel. Only a few hundred views, less than 3 minutes long. But in it, Clarissa was clear, deliberate, even emotional. I think what makes this mural so powerful, Clarissa had said, is that it captures the heart of someone who never needed to be the loudest voice in the room, to make the biggest impact. Shaq's story is a lesson in humility, in quiet action, and in using your platform to lift others. Tory clipped the footage, posted it with a side-by-side of Clarissa's mocking selfie. Her caption read, "2 years ago she called him a hero. Yesterday she called him a clown. Which is it, Clarissa?" The post blew up within hours. The hypocrisy was too blatant to ignore. It wasn't just public. It was recorded. Her own words, her own praise, turned back on her like a boomerang made of truth. And suddenly the narrative around Clarissa shifted from callousness to calculated cruelty. This wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was strategy. More digging followed. Minutes after Tory's post, internet sleuths unearthed meeting notes from the Cultural Committee's archives. Public records that showed Clarissa Dunn had been one of the key voices pushing for Shaq's inclusion in the mural lineup. She'd spoken at the funding meeting, citing his consistent generosity toward underserved youth and long-standing presence in Savannah's charitable spaces. She'd even helped write the mural's dedication plaque, which still read, "To the quiet giants among us. Thank you for walking beside us when we needed it most." And yet, 2 years later, she had walked right past that mural, phone in hand, and turned the very man she once championed into a punchline for clout. The internet didn't just call her out. They dissected her. Think pieces emerged within hours. The smile behind the smirk, Clarissa Dunn's fall from manufactured grace, when politeness becomes performance, a case study in selective praise, and the especially pointed, from saint to snake, how a morning host became a master of hypocrisy. Television critics chimed in. Former interns at her station came forward anonymously, describing Clarissa's obsession with image, her rehearsed compassion, her behind-the-scenes attitude that often belied the southern charm she sold on screen. And yet the irony remained the sharpest cut, because the mural hadn't just seen what happened. It had predicted it. One viral tweet read, "She stood in front of that mural and said Shaq used his platform to lift others, then used hers to drag him down. That ain't a fall, it's an unveiling." Back at the city offices, the Cultural Arts Department was flooded with requests to protect the mural. Fans drove in from out of town to take pictures. Kids reenacted the pose of the little boy at Shaq's side. Teachers brought students on walking tours. People lit candles beneath the wall, not in mourning, but in tribute. The mural became more than paint. It became protest. And Clarissa? She vanished from the airwaves. No on-air farewell. No final sign-off. The station released a short statement. "As of today, Clarissa Dunn is no longer affiliated with our network. No apology, no elaboration, just distance. Quick, clean." But the damage had already branded her. Because this wasn't just about Shaq anymore. It was about the performance of virtue. About the way people cloak cruelty in charm. About the double standard of praising someone in public when it's convenient, and ridiculing them in private when it serves ego. Jace watched it unfold quietly. He hadn't posted since the video. He didn't need to. The truth had found its own legs now. But when he saw Tory's clip of the mural unveiling, something in him clenched, not in bitterness but in clarity. He walked back to the park that evening. It was dusk, soft light casting golden halos over the fountain. People milled around the mural, taking photos, pointing. A small boy in an oversized hoodie stood with his father, gazing up at the painted Shaq, his eyes wide in a way Jace recognized. He walked past them, stopping just short of the plaque. His fingers brushed the edge. 2 years ago, The city had immortalized a man for what he gave. Clarissa had called him a hero then. But now, her words were hollow, stripped bare by her own actions. Her fall wasn't a scandal. It was an unveiling. Because character isn't in how we praise the powerful. It's in how we treat them when they're not looking. And the twist in the fountain wasn't some explosive revelation. It wasn't a scandal dragged out with theatrics. It was a simple truth. She stood in front of the mural and still chose to forget the man it honored. But the city didn't forget, and neither did the world. That voice was Jace Holloway. He hadn't asked for attention. He hadn't built a platform or chased virality. He had spoken from memory, from lived truth, and the world had responded not with retweets alone, but with something far rarer: respect. When the invitation came for him to appear on national television, Jace hesitated. The producer had found his email through a mutual contact and framed it as a human interest piece. The man who reminded America that character matters. Jace didn't want a spotlight. He didn't need a title. But something inside told him this was about more than him now. This was a moment to shift the narrative, not away from Clarissa, but towards something better. The studio they flew him to was brighter than he was used to. The lights felt invasive at first, hot on his skin, the microphone clipped to his jacket like a tether. But when the anchor, an older woman with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness, asked the first question, the nerves melted. "So Jace," she said, voice smooth and measured. "You didn't respond with hate. You didn't demand an apology. You told a story. Why?" He took a second. Inhaled. "Because that's what I was given," he said. "Shaq came into my life once, not with words but with action. He handed me a pair of shoes when I needed more than sneakers. I needed to believe I wasn't invisible. So when I saw someone reduce him to a punchline, I didn't want to match cruelty. I wanted to remember. And I figured maybe the world would remember with me." There was silence after that. Not awkward. Reverent. The anchor leaned forward. "Did you expect it to go this far?" "No," Jace said. "I just wanted the truth to stand a chance." Clips of the interviews circulated quickly. People quoted his phrases. Students wrote essays. Community leaders invited him to speak, not as an influencer but as a reminder. His story wasn't polished. It wasn't sculpted for sound bites. That's what made it matter. Meanwhile, the mural in Savannah took on a second life. What had been a modest tribute to community resilience became a pilgrimage point. People traveled from neighboring states to see it. Local bakeries sold cookies shaped like sneakers. Artists drew digital sketches of the moment. Shaq bent to tie a child's shoe. A metal plaque was installed beside the original dedication, etched with words from Jace's post. "These shoes didn't fit my feet, but they fit the kind of man I wanted to be." And through it all, Shaq remained mostly silent. He moved the same way he always had. Quietly, intentionally, he attended a few local charity events, donated anonymously to a community housing project, wrote checks to youth sports programs with no press coverage. But those close to him said something in his posture had changed. Not his smile, not his energy, but a certain stillness had deepened. Then late one evening, without warning, without promotion, Shaq posted just a simple photo of his shoes, by the front door, worn laces curled, creases at the toe. Beneath it, the caption read, "Walk with love, even when they laugh at your shoes." That was it. No hashtags, no explanation, just the kind of truth that didn't need backup. The post hit like a wave. Athletes reposted it. Teachers printed it for their classrooms. Pastors quoted it in Sunday sermons. It wasn't just a clapback. It was a compass. A call to keep walking, no matter how heavy the steps, no matter how loud the noise. Clarissa saw it, of course. She watched from behind a private account, her name stripped from any remaining public channels. No statements followed. No counters. She knew better now. Or at least, she knew silence was all she had left. Her name wasn't just removed from the network. It was scraped from committee listings, event brochures, even the mural project archives. Her words about Shaq from 2 years ago now lived only in screenshots. But Jace? He didn't gloat. He didn't retweet Shaq's post with commentary. He just screenshotted it, printed it on matte paper, and pinned it above his desk. Because it reminded him of where the whole thing had started. Not with a scandal, with a moment. A pair of too big shoes handed to a too small boy, who just needed to feel seen. In the weeks that followed, Jace declined most interviews. He accepted an offer to guest speak at a youth mentorship program, not as a celebrity, but as Mr. Holloway, the guy who remembered what it was like to grow up on the margins. He walked into that gym, much like the one from his childhood, wearing beat-up sneakers. Not Shaq branded this time, just worn canvas shoes he'd kept for years. When the kids asked why he wasn't in Jordans or Yeezys, he smiled. Because the value of shoes doesn't come from their price. It comes from how far you walk in them. The kids nodded. Some didn't get it. Not yet. But one day, maybe they would. Back in Savannah, life returned to rhythm. The diner Shaq loved kept his booth empty until he showed up again. Louise, the waitress, didn't ask questions. She just poured his coffee and gave him a wink. The whole city's talking about you. You know, he chuckled. Let him talk, she smiled. You gonna say anything back? He sipped his coffee. Already did, and that was enough. Because the truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it walks. Quiet. Steady. In size 22s that carry not just a man, but a legacy. And when someone tries to tear that down, not with fists or fury, but with laughter and shade, the answer isn't revenge. It's remembrance. It's rising. And that's what Jace had done. Not for fame, not for clout, but because the world needed a reminder that kindness can stand, that grace can fight, that silence, when chosen with purpose, speaks volume. Clarissa had fallen, but something far greater had risen in her wake. A voice, a memory, a truth that couldn't be captioned. It started on a Tuesday.
They weren't tossed in anger or left behind as a warning. This wasn't that kind of gesture. These shoes didn't mark gang turf or tragedy. They marked respect.
A 12-year-old named Malik had done it first. The shoes weren't his. His older brother had outgrown them. They were too big for Malik's feet, too beat up for resale, but too sacred to throw away. Because they were Shaq shoes. Not the flashy kind, not collector's items, but the same affordable line Shaq had pushed into budget stores when other brands chased profits. Malik remembered the day his brother got them. He remembered how his brother stood taller, talked different, like he'd earned something no one could take away. So Malik took those shoes, tied the laces together, and threw them high, higher than he thought he could. They caught on the first try, dangling against the backdrop of the afternoon sky like a quiet monument. He didn't post about it, but his neighbors saw, and then someone else did it, and someone else. By Friday, power lines across the city bore tribute. Old sneakers, Shaq brand or otherwise, flapping like flags above sidewalks and corner stores. What started as a local ripple spread fast. A hashtag emerged, not from a brand campaign, but from the comment section of a photo posted by a single mother in Macon. She'd taken a picture of her son standing beneath a pair of shoes he'd just thrown. The caption was simple. He said, "It's not a goodbye, it's a salute. Walk with Shaq." By Monday, the hashtag was trending. Not because celebrities boosted it, not because influencers choreographed dances to go with it, but because the stories behind it mattered. They weren't about fame. They were about dignity. Each post a small private history made public for the first time. A woman in Detroit wrote, "When my dad left, I didn't have much, but I had my Shaqs. They made me feel solid, like I could walk through anything." A man in Dallas posted a photo of himself kneeling next to a boy in a wheelchair. Caption: "These were my son's favorite shoes. He never got to meet Shaq, but he felt like he did." Walk with Shaq. An elderly veteran in Pennsylvania uploaded a grainy video from the early 2000s. Shaq had visited his VA center. No press, just handshakes and jokes. "He made us feel human again," the vet said. "Those shoes didn't just carry him, they carried us." There were hundreds, then thousands. The movement took on a life of its own. And through it all, Shaq said nothing. Not because he didn't notice. Of course he did. He saw the shoes dangling from wires as he walked his morning route through Savannah. He saw the murals and chalk drawings, the sidewalk messages that simply read, "Thank you, big man." He watched the footage, read the post, but he never posted a response. Because that wasn't his way. He walked like he always had. Hoodie up, shoulders loose, hands free, no entourage, no statements, just presence, quiet, grounded. But now, something had shifted. He wasn't walking alone anymore. People began to join him, at first subtly, like strangers walking the same path. Mothers pushing strollers slowed their pace to match his. A teenager with headphones walked silently, a few paces behind, pretending not to look. A mail carrier paused her route, just to wave. Then it grew. Groups organized informal Shaq walks. Not marches, not protests, just walks. Neighborhoods stepping out together in worn-out sneakers. Some held hands, some walked in silence. Others told stories about shoes that carried them through hard times. About what it meant to be acknowledged. About how sometimes dignity isn't spoken, it's given. At one walk in Birmingham, a young man stopped mid-road. He stepped to the curb, untied the sneakers from his feet, creases at the toe, soles wearing thin, and tied the laces into a knot. He looked up at the nearest line. He tossed once. Missed.
Again, too short.
The crowd watched silently. Then Shaq, who had shown up quietly at the back of the crowd, stepped forward. He picked up the shoes, nodded to the boy, and launched them in a clean arc. They caught on the wire perfectly. The crowd didn't erupt. They just smiled. Because in that moment, they weren't watching a celebrity. They were watching a man walk the same path he always had. And now, others had finally decided to walk with him. Walk with Shaq became more than a hashtag. It became a reminder that every act of kindness lives longer than we think. That every footstep leaves an echo. That sometimes the biggest legends don't stand on podiums. They walk beside us, one quiet stride at a time. Her fall hadn't sparked celebration. It had sparked reflection. People weren't interested in revenge. They were interested in reminders. In the difference between authenticity and performance. Between kindness as branding and kindness as a way of being. Jace Holloway had moved on, but not in the way fame often encourages. He turned down book deals, politely declined speaking tours. He even asked news outlets to stop referring to him as the man behind the post. He was never interested in being behind anything. He wanted to build something. So he started small. A storefront on the edge of the city. Paint still peeling from the brick. Glass windows with remnants of an old convenience store decal. He called it Second Step. A youth nonprofit that didn't look like much from the outside. But inside it was everything he'd once needed. As a kid, a clean pair of sneakers. A hot meal. A quiet place to think. A computer lab. Volunteers who didn't ask too many questions. No banners. No fancy mission statements. Just open doors. He never said who funded it. But if you looked closely at the computers, they all had a small logo etched in the corner. A silver outline of a sneaker. Mid-step, with a tiny crown above the heel. Jace knew who paid the rent. But Shaq never said it out loud. And Jace never asked him to. Because some acknowledgements don't need to be spoken. Shaq still walked. Same route. Same pace. The city knew him by his gait now. Slow, grounded. Deliberate. Like a man who had nothing to prove. Only presence to offer. Most days he kept to himself. Gave nods. Shared brief moments with strangers. Waved at children. But something had shifted in Savannah. Where once people might have hesitated to speak, now they did. Not to gawk, but to thank. Not to take selfies, but to connect. A barista handed him a cup with a handwritten note on the sleeve. You made my little brother feel like he mattered. A crossing guard stopped traffic one day, not for cars, but just to hand Shaq a folded note with a Polaroid inside. It showed a middle school gym. 2 kids holding up peace signs. Shaq kneeling beside them. The note read, "You gave us shoes. We still wear your kindness." He didn't always react. But the way his shoulders softened, the way his eyes stayed fixed on the paper for a beat longer than necessary, that said enough. And then one morning, on the same path near the old marble fountain, it happened. A little girl broke away from her mother's grasp. She couldn't have been older than 5. Pigtails bouncing, pink sneakers lighting up with every step. She darted toward him, arms open, smile wider than her face could hold. She hugged his leg without hesitation. Shaq paused mid-step, looked down, and chuckled softly. "I like your shoes," she said. He smiled. "You think they're too big?" She shook her head with certainty. "They're perfect." He reached down, patted her back gently, then handed her one of the stickers he always kept in his pocket now. Sneaker-shaped, shiny, with the word "walk" bold in block letters. She held it like a trophy. Her mother caught up, apologizing. But Shaq just nodded, waved it off, and kept walking. The girl waved behind him until he was out of sight. And somewhere, a bystander, maybe a tourist, maybe a local, captured the moment. Not for likes, not to tag, just to remember. The photo made its way online a few days later. It didn't go viral. It didn't need to. It circulated quietly. The caption was only 5 words. Still walking. still showing up. And behind the image, something settled in Savannah. Peace. Not in the absence of noise, but in the presence of clarity. The city had learned something in the chaos. That not all storms are loud. That some truths are found not in shouts or callouts, but in the stillness after the uproar. And that love, when consistent, when real, leaves an echo that outlasts anything thrown against it. At second step, Jace finished a shift handing out backpacks to teens preparing for a job readiness program. A girl he'd mentored for months asked him one day, "Why'd you name it that?" He paused, smiled. "Because the first step is survival," he said. "But the second, that's the one you take when you realize you're not walking alone anymore." And on a street corner 2 blocks away, a new pair of old sneakers joined the growing flock, swinging gently from a power line. They weren't Shaq brand. They weren't even name brand. But they were tied tight, laces knotted like a quiet promise. And above them, the sky was still blue. The camera pans back, wide shot now. Shaq walking, alone, but never lonely. A city behind him, not in noise, but in rhythm. And a quiet narration rolls in, not shouted, just whispered like truth carried on breeze. Sometimes, the loudest storms come from the smallest drops, but even in noise, love can echo louder. If this story stirred something in you, don't scroll past it. Share it with someone who believes quiet strength still matters. Start a conversation that doesn't trend, but stays. And next time you see someone mocked for simply showing up, ask yourself, what kind of footprints am I leaving behind?